The Peter Davison era had shown that Doctor Who could survive after Tom Baker's 7-year-long reign as the eponymous character. So after the Fifth Doctor's final story, the intense Caves of Androzani, the show once more had to prove it could survive a change in lead actor. To ease this transition, it was decided that the Sixth Doctor's first story would air at the end of season 21, giving the audience the chance to get to know this incarnation of the Doctor earlier. This new Doctor was played by Colin Baker, who had previously been cast in Doctor Who only one season earlier, playing an antagonist. This is an interesting choice, as the audience would have already been primed to see him as villainous, fitting how he is characterised in the story. To help bridge the change to a new Doctor, Peri's position as a companion allows her to act as an audience surrogate. Her distrust of the recently regenerated Doctor is used to reflect the audience's hesitancy to accept the change. As this is only Peri's third story, not counting Big Finish, she is still relatively unfamiliar with travelling in the TARDIS, allowing her perspective to more easily represent that of the viewers. As Peri was a recent addition to the show, it further creates the idea that this story is set up to be the first step in a new era. However, a few might prefer to call it a misstep, as the twin dilemma isn't regarded particularly highly among some fans, as the story was voted worst in polls conducted in 1988, 2009, 2013 and 2023. This poor reputation can be attributed to its terrible acting, cheap sets, which do sometimes actually wobble, and its role in leading to the show's eventual cancellation. So, where did it go wrong? The show asserts that it's moving in a fresh new direction within the first 5 seconds of the story, as the updated title sequence is unveiled. Not only has the neutral-faced Davison been replaced by the grinning Baker, but the sequence has become overall more colourful, suggesting a lighter version of the show compared to the more grim tendencies of the Fifth Doctor's era, with Resurrection of the Daleks' high body count. Unlike the introduction of a new Doctor in Castrovalva, this story doesn't start with a reprise of the regeneration. This is because reprises are often used when continuing stories after cliffhangers. However, as the story is presenting itself as a new beginning, it is produced not to appear as a continuation of a previous story. It also avoids looking like a cliffhanger, as those are times of danger, while in contrast, the show wants to present itself as being calm and assured. The story is able to focus more on the lead characters by being generally uninterested in the exploits of the antagonists. This is particularly noticeable in the story's first part, in which the Doctor and Peri only interact with the story in its closing minutes, which also foreshadows how many stories in this era will begin with the two of them in the TARDIS for extended periods of time, away from the actual narrative. This focus on the main characters allows the audience to learn more about this new Doctor, whether he is revealed to be pompous, arrogant and cruel. Though, over the course of the story, his character does develop to become less violent while retaining some of his more self-centered manner. It is very rare in classic Who for characters to have much growth, other than as symptoms of the actors changing as people, so this story bravely embarks into new territory. This sudden change in personality could be attributed as a negative side effect of his regeneration, which can also be seen when he suddenly starts to break down in the TARDIS wardrobe surrounded by past outfits, representing his rejection of his former selves. Another key scene from part 1 occurs midway through, when the Doctor attempts to kill Peri. After coming to the conclusion that Peri is in fact an evil alien spy sent to spy on him, he starts to strangle her. The lighting through the scene, and the rest of the story, is very flat, giving the impression that this is uninteresting and unremarkable. So when viewed through Peri's perspective, it foreshadows how the Doctor's more violent tendencies are to become the norm. By taking place in the familiar setting of the TARDIS, the scene creates a feeling of betrayal as the Doctor subverts the safety of the TARDIS when turning homicidal. The Doctor's aggressive nature across the story is used to mirror how the show had lost itself and was actively destructive, though in this case, causing harm to itself. This is not the only breach of the TARDIS's safety in the story, because later on, 2 of the antagonistic Silver Birdmen enter the ship, showing how darker ideas are now going to be part of the show going forward. Peri is only able to stop the Doctor by showing him his reflection. By showing the Doctor what he has become, she hopes to change his behaviour. This suggests that she still sees good in him, presuming he has the potential to improve, just as the story hopes that by focusing on Doctor Who's capacity for violence could lead the programme to change. However, just as the show would continue to be violent, so would the Doctor, as later on in the story he attempts to strangle another character. After his barbarous outburst, The end of part 1 shows the Doctor deciding to repent for his actions by becoming a hermit from a 1,000-years-long solitude on the barren asteroid of Titan III, with Peri as his unwilling disciple. Titan III is depicted as bearing very close resemblance to an Earth quarry, a staple of Doctor Who. A quarry is also used later in this story for Gioconda. By having the story be so aesthetically unremarkable, it presents the universe the characters inhabit as being dull and unchanging, which is used to reflect how Peri feels that she's stuck in places she despises. This is particularly noteworthy after the previous story, which was also set in what looked like a quarry, as in the caves of Androzani things get progressively worse for Peri, with her almost dying of spectrotoxemia in the story's closing moments. So the prospect of spending the rest of her life somewhere similar would not have seemed appealing. In the remains of a spaceship on Titan III, they find Lieutenant Hugo Lang. He's played by Kevin McNally, so this character could be considered foreshadowing for Flux. After they bring him to the TARDIS, he points his gun at them for the cliffhanger. He'll do something similar for the next part's cliffhanger. This creates meaning that transcends the original text, as the use of repetition criticises how samey many stories are in this era, and the circular narrative of part 2 that both starts and ends with him holding a gun is used to convey that the show is going to rely on things that had previously occurred, such as in the next story, Attack of the Cybermen, which references multiple stories that released 2 decades previously. With the sense of betrayal created by the episode admitting that the bold new ideas it promised will be suspended by the repetition of previous ideas, mirrored in the sense of betrayal that Peri feels as Hugo threatens to kill her a second time, despite her helping to save his life. In part 2, Hugo heads to the wardrobe, where he finds a jacket presumably made out of foil. By having all 3 leads change costumes into tasteless garments, it ingeniously shows changes in their characters. With the 6th Doctor, it is his main costume, so it represents his personality now being loud and uncaring for others. With Peri, it shows her attempting to gain the Doctor's trust by being more like him, even though this fails, as he responds by using her own insult against her. Yuck! By also abandoning any sense of style, Hugo's costume change shows how he started to side with the Doctor and Peri. Later on, he takes off the gaudy abomination of a jacket, which foreshadows the end of the story, where he chooses not to join the Doctor and Peri. To prove to the viewer that this story is a self-reflective masterpiece, in part 3 the Doctor openly admits he no longer knows if he's coming, have gone, or have been, and that he's falling to pieces, which shows that the writer is deliberately making the Doctor, and by extension, the story, flawed. During the story, we often see the perspective of the titular twins Romulus and Remus, who are named after the legendary founders of Rome. This creates the idea that the story they are a part of will be the start of something grand and impressive, but by having their acting ability be somewhat flawed, it suggests this story will in fact not be able to perform its role in being the start of this promised new era, and by having the twins being kidnapped by the villain to help in his evil scheme, it alludes to how this episode will be used against the show and contribute to its cancellation. Another example of these flaws is that many of the sets do not look realistic at all, such as the clearly painted slug trail leading up to Mestor's throne. This, combined with some of the rather terrible acting, is used to pull the viewer out of the diegesis, as the sense of disbelief created is used to allow the audience to empathise with Peri and her dislike of the surroundings. By having Mestor, the antagonist, being slug-like, symbolises how Doctor Who has to fight against being disgusting and slow-paced. Another symbol that the writer employs to convey meaning is the eggs. Eggs usually represent new life. In this case, by having a new Doctor, it gives Doctor Who a chance for a new beginning. However, the eggs in the story are used for destroying the universe, so they are used as the ultimate symbol to represent how the twin dilemma will do severe damage to Doctor Who and lead to the programme's end. Most audiences may expect the narrative to condemn the Doctor for his use of violence over the course of the story. However, this is subverted to show how this new incarnation of the Doctor will lead the show in a new direction. This subversion occurs by having Mestor ultimately defeated when the Doctor throws a bottle of Moston acid at him, causing him to melt. The acid is also an orange liquid, which evokes carrot juice, the same liquid that this incarnation mutters about before his death, creating poetic bookends for the 6th Doctor's era. At the end of the story, the Doctor says that he's the Doctor whether you like it or not. This shows how aware the text is of itself. While the dialogue seems aimed at Peri, it's almost directly responding to the audience, preempting their reaction to the new Doctor. This almost fourth wall break is used to show how Doctor Who is relying too much on references to itself, something demonstrated by the episode as a whole. Overall, it's clear that the Twin Dilemma is not the most enjoyable story to watch, for a multitude of reasons. Yet, as my analysis concludes, these are all deliberate choices, as this is a story that truly allows the audience to empathise with Peri, who is also subjected to ample torment. And just as the audience are able to see the world through Peri's eyes, Peri also becomes a representative of the audience, with her experience with the Doctor mirroring our experience with the show as a whole, allowing the Twin Dilemma to provide commentary about its own role in the history of Doctor Who. Take the scene at the very end of Part 2. Peri sees the base explode and believes the Doctor is dead, which deeply saddens her, despite how cruel he has been over the course of the story. An obvious allegory for the 1985 hiatus, in which despite fans' many gripes with the show at the time, they still campaigned heavily to get it back, and in both cases, the Doctor was only gone comparatively shortly. By using the show to critique itself, the Twin Dilemma becomes a postmodernist, metatextual masterpiece, able to surpass temporality itself to such an extent that it's an eternally timeless and classic artwork. In conclusion, this story gets 10 yucks out of 10. So, let me know how you would rate this infamous story, or alternatively, just comment all your thoughts on Carrot Juice.